The train stopped with a sound that only others could hear. Elias Mendel didn't notice the screech of metal or the barking of dogs. He only felt the world shudder beneath his feet, a vibration that rattled through the frozen ground and into his bones. When the doors slid open, light poured in like a blade. The people moved, not because they were told, but because motion was the only thing left between them and death. He followed the others out of the cattle car. Snow fell, or maybe it was ash. He could no longer tell the difference. The silence inside him was total now, vast, endless, absolute. He had not heard a sound since the winter before the war, when fever and infection had taken his hearing like a thief in the night. But he still remembered how the world once sang, the hum of strings, the laughter of his wife, the whisper of wind through his violin's open heart. Now the wind only moved his coat. They marched through gates crowned with iron letters he could not read. Orders were shouted, dogs lunged, numbers replaced names. He saw mouths open and close like clockwork, a rhythm without melody. In that moment, he understood what it meant to live inside a world made entirely of echoes. The guards pointed, divided, pushed. He ended up in a barrack filled with men who carried eyes instead of voices. Each had learned the language of gesture, of glances, of survival. Elias did not speak much. His lips formed words out of habit, but they reached no one. At night, he dreamt in sound, in scales and harmonies that no longer existed. He would wake to silence so thick it felt like drowning, and yet somewhere deep in that darkness there was still rhythm, the faint, stubborn beat of his own heart. A week later, he saw the notice. Musicians wanted, for the camp orchestra. He read it 3 times before believing it. Music? Here? He signed his name, Elias Mendel, violinist. When the guards brought him to the rehearsal hut, he saw instruments stacked like bones, violins without strings, cellos with cracks through their ribs. The conductor, a tall man with hollow cheeks, looked him over and frowned. "Play," he said. Elias lifted the bow. The wood felt foreign in his hand, too light, too fragile, like holding the memory of something lost. He drew it across the string. He couldn't hear the sound, but he could feel it. The trembling wood, the vibration against his fingertips, the faint hum that existed only in his body. The conductor's eyes widened. "Good," he said. "Play again." And so he did. Within days, Elias became part of the orchestra, a silent man who never missed a cue. He watched the leaders bow, the rise and fall of shoulders, the movement of lips counting measures. He learned the tempo through breath, not beat. The others whispered about him when they thought he couldn't see. The deaf one, they called him. But when he played, even they fell silent. He didn't need sound. He played with his pulse. In the mornings, the orchestra stood near the gate and played marches as prisoners were sent to work. The guards listened with indifference, cigarettes burning in the wind. Elias's bow moved in steady rhythm, his eyes half closed. He imagined each note rising above the snow, floating, free, beyond fences and smoke. Music, he thought, was the only thing that could escape. One evening, when the others were gone, Elias stayed behind. He sat alone on the wooden stool, the violin resting against his chest. He didn't play. He simply held it, hand over the strings, feeling the ghost of vibration still alive within the wood. The silence around him was not empty. It was full of memory, of breath, of things unsaid. He thought of Anna, his wife. She used to sit by the window when he practiced, humming softly to herself. He could still see her lips shaping the tune, Bei mir bist du Schein, the song of better days. He wondered if she was still alive. He wondered if she still hummed when the world grew too quiet. His fingers began to move, almost without will. The bow followed. The note was silent, but he felt it bloom in the air, like a prayer without words. Outside, snow drifted down. Inside, time stood still. A few days later, during roll call, the orchestra was made to play as a new transport arrived. Elias saw the faces, children, mothers, old men, their eyes blank, their steps trembling. He played for them, not because he was told to, but because someone had to. He closed his eyes and imagined sound again, a D major, bright and clear, enough to break through heaven itself. He could almost hear it, or maybe he just remembered what hearing felt like. When the line passed, one of the guards looked at him oddly. "You," the man said, pointing. "Play something happy." Elias lifted the bow. He played nothing that could be called happy, but it sounded, even to those who could hear, like hope, pretending to be obedient. That night, he couldn't sleep. The notes still trembled inside him, trapped like birds. He sat up in the dark and touched the violin again. For the first time, he wondered if silence was a curse or a mercy. Perhaps the world had grown too cruel to deserve music. Perhaps sound itself had chosen to die. And yet he kept playing, every night, for himself, for the ghosts, for a world he no longer heard but still believed in. Spring arrived like a rumor, no, one believed. The snow thinned, revealing mud and broken stones beneath the fences. Even the air seemed uncertain, too heavy to be called warm, too alive to remain cold. The orchestra continued to play each morning, as it always had. They played for the living and sometimes for the dying. No one said which was which anymore. Elias stood in the same corner, his back straight, his eyes on the conductor's bow. He followed breath, not rhythm. Every movement had weight, not of music, but of memory. Yet something inside him had begun to change. The silence that had once been prison now began to open, like a door left ajar. He started to sense other rhythms, the shuffle of feet, the clatter of tin bowls, even the soft sigh of air through barbed wire. 1,000 tiny vibrations that became his new orchestra. It was then that he first noticed the boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, thin as a reed, his hair shaved close. The boy stood near the barracks after roll call, holding a pot of soup too large for his hands. Elias watched him stop whenever the orchestra played. He never spoke, just listened, head tilted slightly, as if trying to memorize the silence between notes. One afternoon, when the guards left and the others packed away their instruments, Elias saw the boy standing by the doorway. He gestured for him to come closer. The boy hesitated, then stepped inside, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Elias picked up his violin and placed it gently in the boy's hands. The child froze, terrified he might break it. Elias smiled and guided his fingers toward the strings. He lifted the boy's palm and pressed it against the wood. The boy flinched, then widened his eyes. The violin was alive. It vibrated softly beneath his hand, like a heartbeat trapped in maple and string. Elias tapped his own chest and nodded. "Here," he mouthed. The boy understood. They met again the next evening, when the guards were drunk and the camp quieter than usual. Elias taught him not how to play, but how to feel. He let him touch the vibrations, the resonance of silence turning into something divine. The boy's name was Jakob. He worked in the kitchens, trading scraps of food for information, surviving through invisibility. But now, he said, he had something to live for. Elias couldn't hear the words, only saw them on the boy's lips, but he understood anyway. The lessons continued in secret. Sometimes Jakob hummed softly so Elias could follow the movement of his throat, the rhythm of sound he could no longer hear. They communicated through gestures, one tap for yes, two for no, the rest through eyes that said everything. Elias began composing again, not on paper, but inside the violin itself. Each night he played new vibrations into the wood, small fragments of something greater. He called it the song beneath the noise. It wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to be felt. As the weeks passed, others noticed. The guards thought nothing of it. A man playing, a boy listening. But among the prisoners, whispers spread. There is music that no one can silence. Some nights, when the cold became unbearable, small groups gathered near the orchestra hut just to feel it. The trembling air, the almost sound of salvation. Elias would sit with Jakob beside him, eyes closed, bow gliding over invisible melody. It was not defiance in the open sense. It was resistance disguised as prayer. One night, the conductor, Weissman, came to the barrack. He stood silently until Elias finished playing. Then he said, "You play differently. Not for them, for us." Elias nodded. Weissman looked at the boy beside him. He listens like he believes it can save him. Elias wrote a single word on the table with his finger. Maybe. The conductor left, but the next morning, when the orchestra played at roll call, something had changed. The tempo slowed. The notes lingered. Even the guards seemed unsure what they were hearing. It was the same march, and yet not. It was hope, hiding inside obedience. Jakob began bringing small treasures to repay his teacher. A piece of bread, a pencil stub, a button shaped like a star. One day, he placed a thin scrap of paper on the workbench, a torn label from a Red Cross package. Elias turned it over and saw faint musical lines printed on the back. Jakob pointed at it, then at the violin. "Right. It," he mouthed. Elias took the pencil. The lead was weak, but enough. He drew 5 trembling bars and began to etch out the song that lived in his chest. Each note was a heartbeat, each measure a prayer. The boy smiled. It was the first time Elias had seen someone smile in that place. Days blurred into one another. The rumors of liberation grew louder, though Elias could not hear them. He saw it in the faces of others, the flicker of something fragile, almost dangerous, hope. 1. Morning. Jakob did not come. Elias searched the crowd at roll call, but couldn't find him. That night he played alone, his hands trembling as the bow moved. The violin vibrated with fear and longing. When Jakob returned 2 days later, his face was pale. He whispered that a guard had caught him with bread meant for another prisoner. He had been beaten, but he was alive. Elias reached out and touched his shoulder. A silent, "Thank you," a wordless, "Don't stop." By early spring, Elias had finished his composition. It wasn't written anywhere. It lived entirely inside the wood, in the fibers and the air. He had poured himself into it. Every memory, every silence, every face that had passed by the orchestra yard. He wanted to play it one last time, not for the guards or the camp, but for the dead, the ones whose names had vanished into smoke. He told Jakob with a gesture, "Tomorrow." The boy nodded. He promised to come. That night, Elias stayed awake. He sat by the small window, watching the sky change from gray to black. He couldn't hear the wind, but he could feel it moving, brushing against the walls like invisible music. He lifted the violin one final time and pressed his hand to the wood. It was warm, alive, trembling with everything it had absorbed: sorrow, love, prayer, and something beyond all those things. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he heard something, not with his ears, but with everything else. It was not the sound of strings. It was the sound of being human. The morning came gray and brittle, as if even the light feared to enter. Frost clung to the fences like cobwebs of glass. Elias stood in the orchestra yard, violin in hand, his fingers stiff from the cold. The guards ordered the usual march. Rows of prisoners lined up, their faces hollow but eyes still searching for anything that might mean survival. Elias saw Jakob among them, smaller than before, bundled in a coat too big for his body. Their eyes met across the distance, a flicker of recognition that neither guard nor winter could erase. The conductor lifted his hand. The first note was supposed to be a march, obedient, mechanical, but Elias hesitated. For a heartbeat, he thought of everything this place had stolen: sound, laughter, faith, names. And then he played something else. It began softly, the bow trembling in his grip, a single vibration that spread through the air like breath on glass. Others joined in without knowing why. The melody shifted, no longer the rhythm of commands, but of memory. The guards shouted, confused. One struck the conductor with his rifle butt. The man fell, but the music did not stop. It rose instead, trembling, defiant, alive. Elias closed his eyes. He felt Jakob's gaze on him, steady and unafraid. For a moment, time bent. The camp disappeared. There was only rhythm, hearts beating, feet pressing against frozen earth, wind cutting through barbed wire like strings of a cosmic violin. Even those marching felt it. They could not hear it, but they felt it. A hum beneath their skin, a pulse of something too human to kill. When the last vibration faded, Elias lowered the bow. The silence that followed was not fear, it was reverence. A guard walked over, grabbed the violin, and threw it to the ground. The sound, even Elias could not hear it, must have been shattering, but he didn't move. He simply stared at the broken pieces, then looked up at the boy. Jakob mouthed a single word, "Tomorrow." Elias nodded. That night the camp burned with rumors. The Russians were near. Artillery thundered from miles away. Even those who could hear said the sound was like the end of time. Elias sat on his bunk, holding what remained of the violin, the neck, the scroll, a few loose strings. He pressed it to his chest and closed his eyes. He didn't think of revenge or escape. He thought of Anna. He thought of Jakob. He thought of the note that would outlive all others, the one no one could destroy. When dawn came, the guards were gone. The gates stood open. Prisoners wandered out, dazed and blinking into the pale morning light. Elias walked slowly, each step a prayer. He carried the broken violin in his hands like a relic. Snow fell again, soft and hesitant. He looked up and for the first time felt no weight. Silence, his oldest companion, was now peace, not punishment. He whispered a name into it. The silence whispered back. Years passed. Elias lived quietly in Prague after the war. He repaired instruments, though he rarely played. His hearing never returned, but music never left him. One afternoon in 1951, there was a knock at his door. A young man stood there, holding something wrapped in cloth. He was thin, with dark eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he spoke. "I think this belongs to you," he said. He unwrapped the cloth, and there it was. The violin, repaired, whole again. Elias froze. His fingers reached out, trembling as they touched the familiar curves, the grain of the wood. It vibrated faintly, even in still air. It remembered. He looked at the man. "Jakob?" he mouthed. The young man nodded. His eyes filled with light. "I found it," he said. "After the liberation. I've kept it safe. It still sings." Elias smiled, a smile that belonged to no time at all. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit," he said silently. The two men sat across from one another. Elias lifted the bow, drew it across the strings, and though he heard nothing, he felt everything. The vibration hummed through the room, through the floor, through their bones. Jakob closed his eyes and began to cry. When the music ended, neither spoke. There was nothing to say. They had already said it. In a language without sound. Elias died 10 years later, in his sleep. The violin passed to Jakob, who became a teacher. He never taught scales or theory. He taught his students how to listen, not with ears, but with presence. Music, he told them, is what remains when silence refuses to break. In 1973, during a memorial concert in Krakow, one of Jakob's students played that same violin on stage. The hall was full, lights dimmed. When she began to play, the audience felt it before they heard it, a trembling under their feet, a living heartbeat in the air. The melody was simple, gentle, human. When it ended, no one clapped. They simply sat in silence. The same silence that had once buried sound now carried it. On the program, written in small faded letters, was the title, "The Song Beneath the Noise." Composer, Elias Mendel, Auschwitz, 1944. Decades later, the violin was placed in a museum in Krakow. It rests there still, behind glass. Visitors come and stand quietly before it. Some say they can hear a faint hum in the air, too soft to record, too steady to be wind. Others say it's only imagination. But those who know, who truly listen, say it's something else. Not a ghost, not a sound, a vibration, alive, eternal. The song that outlived the silence. If this story reached you, remember, silence is not emptiness. It is where truth waits to be heard. Elias Mendel's music was never written, yet it survives, not in sound, but in every act of compassion that hums quietly beneath our noise. Subscribe to Voices from the Camps. Help keep alive the stories that still tremble in history's quiet corners. Stories of faith, of defiance, and of the fragile, immortal music of the human soul.